from down there in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. A lot to be proud of, Kentuckians. And including those young service members on their very first deployment. They did not sign up to defend our nation to be lectured about pronouns. And their parents didn't send them off for that, did they? No, they did not. They signed up to fight and defend this nation and our families, didn't they? God bless them. And they deserve better than what Joe Biden and the liberal elites gave them. So readiness, retention, and recruiting plummeted it, and our enemies were on the march, weren't they? Right before our very eyes. That is why so many veterans, active duty troops, and military families turned to President Trump. They were desperate for a commander-in-chief willing to stand up and say enough against all odds, didn't they? How many times they tried to kill him? 3? How many times they indicted him? You're going to use all your fingers and toes, aren't you? At least I do. You know, I struggled in school. Okay. They were desperate. Enough is enough. Pete Hegseth was one of those courageous leaders too, wasn't he? Before he ever stepped into the Pentagon, Pete was fighting this battle publicly when it was unpopular to do so. I have his book long before this election, The War on Warriors, right? God bless him for publishing that and exposing that. You better believe they were coming after us. He spoke for the white war fighters. He spoke for the troops. He spoke for the combat veterans who were sick and tired of watching politicians weaken the greatest military on earth and encourage our enemies to be emboldened. And he paid a price for it. But real leaders don't back down when pressure comes, do they? No. They lean into it. That is exactly why President Trump put Pete Hegseth in the lead at the Pentagon. Think about where we are in history right now. And you're having the Secretary of War coming here to little old Kentucky to see you today. Is that something? That's something to be proud of. That reflects on you. I can't take credit for that. That reflects on you. I mean, there's few folks more busier than they miss like the day before Christmas for Santa Claus. He's flat dadgum busy, isn't he? With that going on. Because President Trump knows the difference between a bureaucrat and a warfighter, and he picked a warfighter and picked Hegseth. Together they're doing what the political class said couldn't be done. They are rebuilding the strength, confidence, and warrior ethos of our armed forces, bear with me on this, from the inside out. Got that? The inside out. That's culture. Because military strength starts with a culture, a warrior culture. You cannot deter our enemies if your troops are distracted by politics. You cannot project strength if retention and recruiting is collapsing. And President Trump understands something the political class never will. Peace comes through strengths, just as President Reagan knew, didn't he? Didn't he? We're seeing the same contours, aren't we? Not apologies, not weakness, not decline, strength. That is President Trump's vision for global peace and prosperity. And every American that loves this nation should stand behind it. I learned about strength the hard way. I learned it in operations where every decision mattered. I learned it from senior enlisted leaders who taught me what real leadership looked like Senior Chief Steve Brown right there. The kind that does not come from a briefing room or a book, but it comes from being the first one out the door and the last one back in. I've seen what happens when America is strong. I've seen what happens when America is weak and it hesitates. I've served alongside extraordinary Americans who carried the weight of this country on their backs without asking for any recognition. God bless them and their families. Men who repeatedly miss birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, and more to serve our nation without fanfare. They didn't join to be social media celebrities. Men who came home changed forever. Some who never came home at all. Too many. I think about them every day. I think about the families who got that fateful knock on their door. People many times ask me, Ed, what's the hardest thing you ever did? Navy SEAL training, Ranger training? No, it was not. It was to put on my dress uniform with the chaplain and be the face of the worst day of the life of those parents. I hope y'all got that back here. I think about those families every day. It'll sear your soul when you live that world. I think about the kids growing up with that folded flag on the mantle. Every medal I received, whether it was my 4 Bronze Stars or any other recognition, belongs just as much to the men beside me as it does to me. I can't take credit for that whatsoever. No, I cannot. Because in the military, nothing is accomplished as known. Teamwork is the center of gravity. And one thing every combat understands is this: the world is dangerous, evil is real, and weakness gets people killed. I've seen evil up close. I've looked it in the eye through the front sight of a rifle. in combat. I can tell you the only language evil understands is strength. They don't care about social media tweets or posts. That is why President Trump's vision for the strongest military in the world is not a campaign slogan. It's a matter of our nation's survival, and it puts deterrence back on the table so we don't have to have hostilities. And today, he knows that. And today, under President Trump, Pete Hegseth, we're finally moving back in the right direction, aren't we? We're restoring standards based on warfighting, restoring accountability and performance and leadership, restoring deterrence for peace and prosperity, just like President Reagan did, correct? Restoring pride and service. Have you seen the retention recruiting is skyrocketing? Parents are glad to be taking them youngins down there to join, aren't they? We are telling young Americans once again that the military is not a social club. It is not a political activist organization. It is a warrior institution dedicated to defending the United States of America based on a long tradition. That matters. Because the young Marines standing post tonight, it matters. The pilots flying missions all around the world, it matters. The Army Rangers deployed overseas with other troops, it matters. The ships at sea with sailors, it matters. The special operators hunting terrorists in places we can never talk about doing what our nation asks, it matters. And it matters to their families too, doesn't it? I was that guy once for a career that spanned 3 decades, so I know what it's like to be a long way from home on a hard mission, wondering whether the people back in Washington had your back or not. Those folks we just talked about deserve a commander-in-chief who has their back and leaders they can trust. They have them in Donald Trump, and they have them in Pete Hegseth, don't they? Not political distractions dreamed up by bureaucrats in Washington or people that are hung up on doing social media tweets. I believe in something else. America still produces the greatest fighting men and women in the world because of their parents and their grandparents. Have I got that right? We have not lost that spirit. It is there, and you epitomize that being here today. You see it in the next young generation, patriots stepping forward to serve in record numbers. You see it in veterans across the country who still believe America's worth fighting for. And that is why I am running, to be a champion for them and their families in Washington, D.C. I came home from wars, and I looked at Washington and the misrepresentation of our values, and I said, somebody's got to do something, it just won't be me. For the same reason I joined in 1983. There was no books or movies about SEALs. There was no bonus to join. I never met a SEAL. But by golly, if one farm boy from Kentucky is going to make a difference, then that's the way I was going to do it. I was 26 years old. I wasn't 19 out of high school. I wasn't 22 out of college. I was full grown from a dairy farm. Politicians up there who never carry the rifle in combat make decisions about young Americans who would, and that's not acceptable. Because leadership matters, culture matters, courage at the top matters, and that's why President Trump's leadership matters.